The man at table 17 had not touched his food in 41 minutes. Marcus Caldwell stood behind the host station at the Aurelia and watched him on the security monitor, and his jaw was beginning to ache from clenching it. The plate of $48 branzino sat exactly where the waitress had placed it. The man had not picked up his fork once. He had not looked at his phone. He had not looked around the room. He had simply sat there, slow and patient, the way a man sits when he is waiting for something to happen that he already knows is coming. Marcus did not yet know what was coming. But the back of his neck had begun to prickle, the way it always did when something was about to go wrong. And the prickling had not stopped for the last 15 minutes. What he also did not know, what he could not have known yet, was that the man at table 17 owned a 38% stake in the holding company that had quietly acquired the Aurelia 6 months earlier. He did not know that the leather jacket the man was wearing had been bought in 1991 from a thrift store on Melrose Avenue and had been worn on 3 continents since. He did not know that the man at table 17 had been awake at 3 in the morning that very week reading a letter, 6 handwritten sentences on a sheet of plain paper that had ended with the question, "Whose name is on the door, Mr. Reeves, yours or theirs?" He did not know any of that yet. He was about to learn all of it in the next 19 minutes, and by then it would already be too late for Marcus Caldwell. If you believe a person's worth is measured by how they treat someone they think can do nothing for them, type respect in the comments. Subscribe. Because the story you are about to hear is the story of one quiet act of courage from a young woman who had everything to lose, and the man who saw her do it. Stay with it to the end. Because the moment of justice is not what you think it is, and the price that gets paid is not paid by the people who deserve it most. The story begins 1 week earlier, in a small apartment on the 3rd floor of a walk-up building on Mansfield Avenue in mid-city Los Angeles. Daniela Hayes was 27 years old, and she had been awake since 5:42 in the morning, because that was when her alarm had gone off, and she had not been able to afford an alarm that lied to her since she was 19. She lay in bed for 90 seconds before her feet hit the floor. The bedroom was small. The window faced an alley. The radiator clanked the way it had clanked every morning since the previous October, the way the building manager had promised to fix in November, the way no one had fixed by April. She made coffee in a stovetop percolator because she had bought it at a yard sale in Inglewood for $3, and because drip machines broke and percolators did not. She drank it back at the kitchen counter, standing because the kitchen had no chairs. Her sister Sad was still asleep in the other bedroom. Sad was 19. She was in her 2nd year at Santa Monica College, majoring in nursing, working 20 hours a week at a coffee shop on Pico to help cover what the financial aid did not. She had a chemistry exam on Friday. The textbook sat open on the kitchen table next to a stack of 3 medical bills, neatly clipped together with a binder clip, the way Daniela had clipped everything important since she was 22. The medical bills were not for Sade. They were for Daniela's mother, who had died in October, and who had spent the last 7 weeks of her life in a hospice that had been billed to the family because the insurance had run out at exactly the wrong moment. The total was $21,411. Daniela was paying it down at $300 a month. The math she had calculated once and never recalculated said it would be paid off when she was 33. She did not think about that math often. She tried not to, but the bills sat on the kitchen table because she had nowhere else to put them, and because she had decided 2 years ago that pretending they were not there would be worse than seeing them. Her shift at the Aurelia started at 4 in the afternoon. She rode the bus from Mansfield to Wilshire and Crescent Heights, transferred rode to Beverly Hills. The ride took 55 minutes. She read on the bus. She was halfway through a paperback copy of The Warmth of Other Suns she had picked up at a library sale. She read carefully, the way she did everything carefully, and she got off the bus at the corner of Wilshire and Linden at 3:33 in the afternoon. She walked the 4 blocks to the Aurelia. She entered through the back, the way she always did, because front entrances were not for staff. She clocked in. She tied her apron. She did not look at her reflection in the glass of the kitchen office because she had learned, somewhere between 23 and 27, that her reflection often told her things she did not have time to hear. She walked out onto the floor at 3:58. She had no way of knowing yet that the man whose life she was about to risk her job to save was already 3 blocks away, sitting in the passenger seat of a parked sedan, reading a letter for what he believed was the 11th and final time. Keanu Reeves was 61 years old, sat in the passenger seat of a 2019 Lincoln MKZ that did not belong to him. The driver's seat was occupied by Margaret Donovan, the woman who had been managing his private business affairs for 14 years, and the only person on earth besides his sister who knew the full list of properties, partnerships, and quiet investments that bore no resemblance to the public catalog of his career. Margaret was 52. She had been a federal prosecutor for 10 years before she had walked away from it for reasons she had never fully explained to anyone, and Keanu had hired her in 2011 not because she was the most credentialed candidate, but because she had been the only candidate who, during the interview, had told him no twice and meant it both times. She kept his life ordered the way some people kept gardens. She was wearing a charcoal pantsuit that morning. She was holding the letter in one hand and a coffee in the other. "You don't have to do this yourself, Keanu," she said. "I have 3 private investigators on retainer. Any one of them could walk through that door tonight." "They could," he said, "but they wouldn't see what I need to see." "Why?" He looked out the window. They were parked on a side street off Wilshire, half a block from the Aurelia. The afternoon light was the soft gold that California sometimes had in March, when the rains had ended and the heat had not yet started. He thought for a moment before he answered, "Because a private investigator walks in knowing he is a private investigator. The staff doesn't see him as a stranger. They see him as a professional. They give him the version of the restaurant they give to professionals. That's not the version I need to see. I need the version they give to the man they think doesn't matter." Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know what I'm going to ask you?" "I know, and the answer." "The answer is the same as it was yesterday. The answer is the same as it will be tomorrow." He paused. He turned the letter over in his hand. The paper was thin. The handwriting was small and neat. 40 years ago, a man named Hollis Pratt slept on a bench in Santa Monica because no one would let him sit indoors. He had served in the United States Army. He had a Purple Heart in a coat pocket and 42 cents in another. He was 41 years old. He died on that bench on a Thursday night in January 1986. I found him on the Friday morning. I was 22. I had bought him a sandwich on the Wednesday, and I had not gone back on the Thursday because I had been busy. She had been my friend. Margaret did not say anything. She had heard parts of this before. She had not heard all of it. "I met him outside a diner on Wilshire," Keanu said. "December of '85. I had been sitting in the back booth, eating a plate of eggs I could barely afford. He was on the sidewalk. He had a cardboard sign that said only USMC, which was wrong because he had been Army. But I learned later that the Marine sign got him more change than the Army sign did. I bought him a coffee. I sat with him on the curb for an hour. He told me about his wife who had left him in 1979. He told me about the medication the VA had stopped paying for in 1983. He told me he had not slept indoors in 7 months. I gave him my number. He called me from a payphone twice that month. Third time he called, I missed the call. I called the number back. It was the payphone outside a 7-Eleven on Lincoln. He had moved on by the time I got there. I drove around Santa Monica for 2 hours looking for him. I didn't find him for 10 days. So when I did find him, he was sleeping on a bench at the end of Ocean Avenue, and he was thinner than he had been 10 days earlier, and I told him I would come back the next night with food." He paused. The light through the windshield had begun to change. Margaret did not interrupt. "The next night was Thursday. I had a call back that ran late. I told myself I would go Friday. I went on Friday. He had died Thursday night. The paramedics had taken the body in the morning. The sandwich was still in the refrigerator in my apartment. It is in every meaningful way still there. I bought a restaurant chain 2 years ago because I have spent 40 years asking myself what I would do if I were ever in a room where someone was deciding that Hollis didn't belong. Tonight, I think, I am going to find out." Margaret took a long breath. She did not argue further. She handed him a small phone, the size of a credit card, that he slipped into the inside pocket of his jacket. She handed him a second device, a tiny audio recorder, which he tucked into the watch pocket of his jeans. The microphone is omnidirectional. It picks up everything within 12 feet. The phone is set to dial my line if you hold the side button for 3 seconds. I'll be parked across the street. 2 attorneys are on call. Security can be at the door in under a minute if you press the button. Okay, Keanu. He looked at her. If something feels wrong before you go in, don't go in. He smiled, slowly, the way he smiled when he had already decided. Maggie, if it felt right, I wouldn't be going in. He opened the door. He stepped out onto the sidewalk, stood for a moment in the soft afternoon light, looking at the corner of Wilshire and Linden, where the front entrance of the Aurelia waited under its black awning with the small gold letters. Then he started walking toward it. The clothes he was wearing had not been chosen for the night. They had simply been the clothes he had been wearing all afternoon, and he had not changed them. A faded gray t-shirt under a brown leather jacket scuffed at the elbows, jeans worn pale at the knees, motorcycle boots that had seen more highways than most cars. He had not shaved in 3 days. His hair was loose at his shoulders. He looked like a man who might have been sleeping in a doorway the night before, and he looked like a man who might have been finishing a coast-to-coast ride that morning. And he looked, to most people, like exactly the kind of man whose right to walk through a particular door was the kind of right someone might decide to challenge. That was the point. He kept walking. Daniela saw him through the front window. She was standing by the host station, refilling a small tray of mint candies for the welcome bowl, and her eyes flicked up the way they always flicked up when someone approached the door. And who she saw was a man, not a homeless man. That was important. She had spent enough years in a city full of pain to have learned the difference between someone who had no home and someone who simply looked like he might. This man's shoulders were square. His stride was even. His hands were not red from the cold. His boots were worn, but his laces were straight. He carried no bag. He moved through the world like a person who knew exactly where he was going. And that was not how a man walked when he had been displaced from everything he owned. But he was wearing the wrong clothes for this restaurant. And Daniela had worked at the Aurelia long enough to know that the clothes were the only thing that mattered to certain people inside. She watched him cross the threshold. The hostess, a young woman named Brittany, who had been at the restaurant 6 months and had absorbed Marcus Caldwell's tone the way new wood absorbs varnish, stepped forward with her professional smile already arranged into something half-frozen. "Sir," Brittany said, "do you have a reservation?" Keanu shook his head. "Just dinner. I'm afraid we're fully committed this evening." The restaurant was not fully committed. Daniela could see the floor from where she stood. There were 9 open tables. 3 of them were 2-tops. One was a 4-top by the window. Brittany was lying because Brittany had been trained to lie, and Daniela had heard the training and she had heard Marcus deliver it. Keanu looked past Brittany. He saw the open tables. He did not say so. "I'd like to wait," he said. "Sir, the wait could be several hours, and even then I cannot guarantee." "Is there a problem, Brittany?" The voice came from behind the host station. Marcus Caldwell stepped out from the office hallway. He was 38 years old. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him precisely, a white shirt open at the collar, and an expression that Daniela had seen him use 100 times. It was the expression he wore when he was about to make himself feel important by making someone else feel small. The expression was patient. It was almost gentle, and that was the worst part of it. "This gentleman is asking about a table," Brittany said. Marcus turned to Keanu. He let his eyes travel down. The jacket, the t-shirt, the jeans, the boots. He let his eyes travel back up. His mouth arranged itself into a small, careful smile. "Sir," he said, "I'm afraid we do require a certain dress code at the Aurelia. Jackets for gentlemen at dinner. We can recommend a number of excellent establishments nearby that would be a better fit for your evening." Keanu looked at him. She'd not blink. He waited the half-second longer than was comfortable before he spoke, which was a thing Margaret had once told him he did, and which he had never quite known he was doing until she had pointed it out. "My jacket is right here," he said. He touched the leather lapel. "Suit jacket, sir. The dress code specifies a suit jacket. You don't list a dress code on your website, I checked this morning." There was a brief silence. His smile did not move. His eyes did slightly. Daniela watched. She had heard Marcus do this before. She had watched him do it to a woman in a wheelchair in January. She had watched him do it to an older man with an oxygen tank in February. She had not said anything either time because she had needed her job, and because she had been told, in private, by Marcus that she would lose it if she ever questioned a customer service decision in front of staff. Now she watched him do it again, and this time, something in her chest tightened in a way she did not yet have a word for. Keanu reached into his back pocket. He pulled out a worn, brown leather wallet. He took from it a black credit card and a folded $20 bill, and he held them up. "I'd like a table," he said. "If you can find me one, I'll be grateful. If you can't, I'll wait at the bar." Marcus looked at the card. The card was not a regular black card. It was a metal card with no embossing, with a small silver letter etched into one corner that Marcus did not recognize. He looked at it for a half-second, longer than was comfortable. Then his smile slipped, almost imperceptibly, and he stepped back. "Of course, sir," he said. "Let me see what we have available." He walked to the host station. He pretended to study the seating chart. He did not study it. He had memorized it. He waved Brittany aside, and he leaned to Daniela, who had remained perfectly still by the mint tray. "Take this gentleman to table 17, he said quietly. Daniela looked at him. "Marcus, 17 is. Take him to 17. Daniela. Get him a menu. Take his drink order." She did not move for a moment. Marcus's eyes met hers. The expression was no longer patient. It was the other expression, the one that was reserved for staff, the one that promised consequences for any question asked aloud. She took a menu from the rack. She walked toward the front. She smiled, the warm, professional smile she had been practicing since she was 19, and she said, "Right this way, sir." She led him toward the back of the dining room. Table 17 was the worst table in the Aurelia. It sat at the back corner against the wall that backed onto the kitchen, 8 feet from the swinging door that the bussers used. The noise from the kitchen leaked through. Smell from the trash room 2 doors down sometimes drifted in. The lighting was wrong. The acoustics were wrong. It was the table where Marcus seated customers he wanted to encourage to leave, and Daniela had been seating people at it on his instructions for 2.5 years. She seated the man. She handed him a menu. She filled his water glass. She said, "I'm Daniela. I'll be your server tonight." He looked up at her. His eyes were dark and warm and entirely calm. They held hers for a moment, and in that moment she felt the very strange and specific sensation of being looked at by a person who was actually seeing her, and not the apron, and not the smile, and not the uniform. "Thank you, Daniela," he said. She walked away. Her hands were shaking slightly. She did not know yet why they were shaking. She would understand in about 20 minutes. But for now, she stood at the silverware station and pretended to polish forks, and she thought, "There is something wrong with that man." And then she thought, "No, there is something wrong with how Marcus just looked at that man. And there is something wrong with how Brittany just looked at that man. And there is something wrong with the table I just walked him to. And there is something wrong with the menu I just handed him. And there is something wrong, in some way I cannot yet name, with what is about to happen in this room tonight." She did not know that she had just become the only person in the entire restaurant who was paying close enough attention to stop it. In the kitchen, Marcus pulled the sous chef aside. Tyler Brennan was 32. He had worked at the Aurelia for 18 months. She had trained at a culinary school in San Francisco, had spent 4 years on the line at a Michelin-starred place in Pasadena before that. And he was, by every measure his colleagues used, one of the most talented young cooks on the west side of Los Angeles. She had a wife named Caroline who was 34 weeks pregnant and on bed rest with preeclampsia. He had 2 months of mortgage payments saved. He had health insurance through the restaurant. He had been calculating for the past 3 weeks exactly how much margin he had if anything went wrong. Marcus pulled him into the dry storage room. The dry storage room had no camera. Marcus had verified that 3 years ago when he had first started using it. "The Branzino," Marcus said. "Table 17 ordered the Branzino." "Okay, use the one from yesterday's prep. The one we held back." Tyler stared at him. The fish Marcus was talking about had been prepped 2 days earlier for a banquet that had been canceled at the last minute. The fish had been held in the walk-in for 1 day. Then it had been transferred to the prep station for service and held for 4 hours at room temperature on Sunday afternoon, because the line cook who was supposed to break it down had called in sick, and Marcus had decided it was too expensive to discard. Then it had been put back in the walk-in. Tyler had told Marcus on Monday morning that the fish was no longer safe to serve. Marcus had said he would handle it personally. The fish had been moved to a separate container, labeled and stored at the back of the walk-in, and Tyler had assumed it would be quietly disposed of. Marcus, that fish is not food anymore. It's fish, Tyler. It got cold and then it got warm. It's not radioactive. It was held above 40 degrees for 4 hours. The danger zone is, I'm aware of what the danger zone is. The customer at 17 is not going to die. It's going to eat a fish, go home, possibly experience some mild discomfort and never come back, which is what we want. Marcus, do you know how much that fish cost the restaurant, Tyler? I don't care how much it cost. $86, wholesale. $86 I'd like to recover. And I'd like to recover it from a customer who is going to leave a 1-star review on Yelp regardless of what we feed him, because that's what people in his situation do. Marcus paused. He let the next thing settle before he said it. You know your eval is next month, right? Tyler did not answer. I'm doing your eval. I have full discretion to recommend renewal or non-renewal. Caroline is due in 6 weeks. Your insurance ends 30 days after a non-renewal. Have I missed anything about your situation that I should be considering? Tyler's jaw moved. His hands were at his sides. He looked at the floor. He looked at the spice rack. He looked at the corner where the fluorescent light buzzed. Plate the branzino, Tyler. Daniela will pick it up at the pass in 12 minutes. Marcus walked out. Tyler stood in the dry storage room for a long moment. He was a good cook. He was a thoughtful man. He loved his wife. He had been raised by a mother who had taught him that what a person does when no one is watching is the only thing that ever defines them. He knew in that moment, in the dry storage room of the Aurelia, exactly what he was about to do. And he knew exactly what it meant that he was about to do it. He walked to the walk-in. He pulled out the container. He carried it to the prep station. He began to butterfly the fish. What he did not know was that 2 minutes earlier, when Marcus had pulled him into the dry storage room, Daniela Hayes had been walking past the dry storage door on her way to the linen closet, and the door had been propped open 3 inches because the latch had been broken for 2 weeks. She had stopped. She had not meant to stop. She had not meant to listen. But she had heard the word Branzino. She had heard the word 17. She had heard the word recover. She had stood there for exactly 41 seconds, pressed against the wall in the back service hallway, and she had heard every single word Marcus had said to Tyler Brennan. She was now standing at her silverware station, holding a polishing cloth she had stopped polishing, looking out at table 17, and trying to understand what she had just become responsible for. She had 2 minutes to decide, maybe 3. She could keep her head down. She could carry the fish out when it was ready. She could put it in front of the man at table 17. She could walk away. She could finish her shift. She could go home on the bus at 11 o'clock, ride the 55 minutes back to Manselst Avenue, sleep 4 hours, get up at 6, send Sade to school, and never tell anyone what she had heard. She could do that. People had done worse things to keep their jobs. She would have her job. She would have her insurance. She would have her $300 a month toward her mother's hospice bill. She would have Sadie's tuition next semester. She would have everything she had built over the last 5 years of bus rides and double shifts and silence in the face of small, daily, manageable wrongs. Or she could warn him. She did not know how. She did not know who he was. She did not know if he would believe her. She did not know if Marcus would see her do it. She knew with absolute certainty that if Marcus caught her, she would lose her job before the end of the shift. He would invent a reason. He had invented reasons before. She had fired a busboy in November for insubordinate body language. He had fired a hostess in January for client confidentiality concerns that she had never been told about. He would invent a reason. He would not need a real one. She thought about her mother. Her mother had died in October. Her mother had been a janitor in a public school for 26 years. Her mother had raised 2 daughters on her own, in a country that had not made it easy, and had said, on the second to last day of her life, when Daniela had been sitting in the green plastic chair next to the hospice bed and had been holding her mother's small, dry hand, "Daniela's baby. There is going to come a time in your life when doing the right thing is going to cost you everything you have, and you are going to know it is coming. And the only thing I want you to remember is that you cannot afford the cost of not doing it." That had been 173 days ago. Daniela set down the polishing cloth. She walked across the dining room. She passed table 11. She passed table 14. She did not look at the security cameras mounted in the corners of the ceiling, because she knew where they were, and she knew which ones had functioning microphones and which ones did not. She walked to the back, past the kitchen, past that storage room with its broken latch, to the small staff bathroom at the end of the hallway. The staff bathroom was the only room in the building without a camera. The owner had refused to install one when Marcus had requested it. The owner did not know yet that this small refusal, which had cost him exactly nothing, was about to save his entire restaurant. She locked the door. She leaned against the sink. She looked at her reflection. She tore a small piece of paper from her order pad. She found a pen. Her hand was steady. The steadiness surprised her. She wrote in clear, careful, capital letters that anyone could read without effort. "Do not eat the fish. It is old." The manager did this on Perking. She read it twice. She folded it once. She folded it again. She held it in her left palm. She unlocked the door. She walked out. In the kitchen, Tyler was finishing the plate. The branzino was butterflied beautifully. He had glazed it with brown butter and capers. He had arranged a small ring of charred lemon around it. She had added a sprig of fresh dill. The plate looked like exactly what it was supposed to look like. There was no possible way, from looking at the plate, for anyone to know what was wrong with it. That was the problem. He set it on the pass. He rang the bell. Daniela walked over. She did not look at him. She did not say anything. She picked up the plate. Tyler watched her pick it up. He watched her walk away. His mouth opened. He did not say anything. His hands closed into fists at his sides. Stood there, perfectly still, in the white light of the kitchen, holding the loaded weight of a decision he had already made and was already, very quietly, beginning to hate himself for. He did not see her hand close around the small folded paper in her left palm. Daniela carried the plate out to the dining room. $48 of poisoned fish on a white porcelain dish. She walked steadily. She wove between tables 11 and 14. She approached table 17. The man was reading something. He looked up as she approached. He set down what he had been reading. It was a small, worn paperback. She could not make out the title. "Your branzino, sir," she said in her warmest professional voice, the voice that was for guests, the voice that was for cameras. "Brown butter, charred lemon, fresh dill. The chef has prepared this beautifully." She set the plate down. She positioned the silverware. She poured a small additional splash of water into his glass. As she set the water pitcher down, her left hand brushed his right hand on the table. The motion was almost nothing, a flicker. The folded paper transferred from her palm to his. His fingers closed around it. Slowly, the way fingers close around something a person already knows is important. She straightened. Her eyes met his for the smallest fraction of a second. She did not nod. She did not signal. She simply held his eyes for that fraction of a second, longer than was natural, and then she stepped back. "Please enjoy your meal," she said. "I'll be right here if you need anything at all." She walked away. She picked up the water pitcher. She walked to the station. Her hands were not shaking now. The thing inside her chest that had been tight since Marcus had told her to seat this man at 17 had loosened. She did not know what was going to happen. She did not know if she had just lost her job. She did not know if anyone was going to believe her. She only knew that she had done the one thing her mother had asked her to do, and the cost of not doing it would have been a cost she could not afford for the rest of her life. She picked up the water pitcher. She walked to table 12. She refilled the glass of a woman who did not look up. Keanu sat at table 17 with a $48 plate of poisoned branzino in front of him and a small folded piece of paper in his right hand. She waited. He waited a full 90 seconds. He picked up his napkin. He set it on his lap. With his right hand under the table, hidden by the white linen tablecloth, he unfolded the note. He read it. He read it again. He read it a third time. He looked down at the plate. He looked at the careful glaze of brown butter on the perfect flesh of the fish. He looked at the small sprig of dill placed precisely on the side of the plate by a man whose hands he had not yet seen, but whose work he could read in the geometry of the arrangement. Something cold and very old moved in his chest. It was not anger. He had been angry many times in his life, and he knew what anger felt like, and this was not it. This was the other thing, the slower thing. It's the thing that lived underneath anger. In the place where Hollis Pratt still slept on a bench in Santa Monica 40 years ago, and where a sandwich Keanu had not delivered on a Thursday night had been sitting, uneaten, ever since. He set the napkin back on the table. He did not eat the fish. He folded the note and tucked it into the inside breast pocket of his leather jacket, slowly, carefully, the way a person handles something that has just become evidence. He picked up his water glass. He took a small sip. He set it down. He looked across the room. He found Daniela. She was at the far end of the dining room by the bar station, doing exactly what a server should be doing, not looking at him, not signaling, not standing too close, just working. He watched her for a moment. He took in her posture, the steadiness of her hands, the careful neutrality of her face. He understood in that moment the precise size of what she had just done. He understood that she had risked the salary on which she was almost certainly the primary earner. He understood that she had risked the health insurance that almost certainly covered someone she loved. He understood that she had done it for a stranger she did not recognize, whose name she did not know, in a uniform that had been designed to keep her invisible. She understood that she had done it anyway. He thought very briefly of his mother. He thought very briefly of Hollis Pratt. He thought very briefly of the letter he had read 11 times. He thought of the question at the end. Whose name is on the door, Mr. Reeves? She knew the answer now. He lifted his right hand to the inside pocket of his jacket. He pressed and held the side button on the small phone for 3 seconds. He felt the device vibrate twice in confirmation. Across the street, in a parked Lincoln MKZ, Margaret Donovan's phone rang once. She answered. She did not speak. She listened. The line was open. Keanu sat back in his chair. He folded his hands on the table in front of him. He waited. He was about to do something he had only done 3 times in his entire life, in 3 different cities, in 3 different rooms, each time with the same slow patience, each time with the same quiet inevitability. He was about to remove the disguise. He was not going to do it by raising his voice. He was not going to do it by standing up. He was going to do it simply, finally, refusing to be invisible any longer. But before he did, something happened that he had not expected. From the host station, Marcus Caldwell looked across the dining room at table 17. He saw the untouched plate. He saw the man sitting calmly, with his hands folded. He saw in the back corner of his peripheral vision Daniela Hayes refilling water at table 12. And he saw in some small animal part of his brain that he did not yet have a name for that something had passed between them. She did not know what. He did not need to know what. Marcus had spent 12 years in restaurants. He had spent 8 years in management. He had built his career on a single hard-earned skill, which was the ability to identify and eliminate the small disloyalties of staff before they grew into large disloyalties of staff. He could feel disloyalty in a room the way a farmer can feel weather changing. And he was feeling it now, coming from the back left corner of his dining room, from a young woman with neat hands and a steady walk who had been a model employee for 2.5 years and who, tonight, for reasons he had not yet identified but absolutely intended to, had become a problem. She walked across the room. He stopped at table 17. "Sir," he said, "is everything to your satisfaction?" Keanu looked up at him. "The atmosphere is very interesting. I notice you haven't touched your fish. Is there something wrong with it? The fish looks perfect. Then perhaps you would like to. I'm savoring the moment." Marcus's smile flickered. He held it. "Of course, sir. Take your time." He started to turn, then he stopped. He turned back. "Daniela," he said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The acoustics of the room carried his voice exactly as far as he wanted it to carry. "Daniela Hayes, could you join me at the host station, please?" Daniela looked up from table 12. Her face did not change. Her hands did not shake. She set down the water pitcher. She walked across the dining room, between tables, past Keanu's table, to the host station at the front. She did not look at him as she passed. Marcus followed her. He stopped at the host station. He smiled. He kept his voice low, low enough that it would not carry to other tables, but loud enough that several of the closest tables would hear, which was the point. "Daniela, I've had 3 complaints in the last 10 minutes about inappropriate familiarity with the customer at table 17's. Specifically that you were observed making physical contact with him during service in a manner that was not appropriate for a server-guest interaction." Daniela said nothing. "I'm afraid I have no choice but to suspend you immediately, pending a full review of the security footage. Please collect your things from the back and exit the building. We'll be in touch about next steps tomorrow." The dining room was getting quieter. People were beginning to notice. A man at table 14 had stopped chewing. Daniela's voice was very even. "Marcus, there are no complaints. I touched a customer's hand for half a second while pouring water. That is not inappropriate familiarity, that is service." The customers will be interviewed if necessary. For now, please go to the back, collect your apron, and leave the building. I'm not leaving. The words came out of her so calmly that for a moment Marcus did not understand them. He looked at her. She had not raised her voice. She had not stepped back. Her hands were at her sides. She was looking at him the way a person looks at a wall that has been there for a long time and has just now become interesting to her. Daniela, I won't ask you again. I am not leaving until you explain to every customer in this restaurant what is in the fish on table 17. The dining room went silent. Every head turned. Marcus's face moved through three expressions in less than a second. The smile fell. The patient look fell. What was left underneath was something pale and very still, and the kind of expression that a person wears when they have understood, in a single instant, the shape of every consequence that is about to follow. Get out, he said. His voice was no longer even. Get out of this restaurant. You are fired. Marcus, you are fired effective immediately. Security will escort you out. There was no security on duty. Brittany did not move. The bartender did not move. The room held its breath, and from table 17 a voice spoke. It was a quiet voice. It carried. Mr. Caldwell, the voice said. Sit down. Every head in the room turned. The man at table 17 had risen from his chair. He had not raised his voice. He was standing with his hands at his sides. His posture was easy and unhurried. She did not look like the same man he had looked like 10 minutes earlier. The clothes were the same. The face was the same. But something had shifted, the way the light shifts when a cloud moves, and what stood before Marcus Caldwell now was a man whose authority did not need to be performed because it had been there the entire time, and no one in the room had been looking for it. Sir, Marcus said. His voice cracked slightly. He hated that it cracked. This is an internal staff matter, and I would ask that. Mr. Caldwell, sit down. Marcus did not sit down. He looked toward the door. He looked toward Brittany. He looked back at the man at table 17. The front door opened. A woman walked in. She was wearing a charcoal pantsuit. She was carrying a leather portfolio. She was followed by two men in dark blazers and a third man in a dark suit who was carrying a worn brown briefcase. They did not look around. They walked directly to table 17. The woman stopped beside the man who had been sitting there. She did not look at Marcus. She looked at the room. Good evening, she said. Her voice was pleasant and entirely professional, the voice of a woman who had spent 10 years prosecuting cases in federal court and had not lost the skill of holding a room with her tone. My name is Margaret Donovan. I represent the holding company that owns Aurelia Restaurant Group. I'd like to thank you all for your patience. I apologize for the interruption to your evening. I'll be brief. The room did not move. The gentleman to my left, Margaret continued, is Mr. Keanu Reeves. Mr. Reeves is the lead investor in the holding company that purchased Aurelia Restaurant Group in 2023. He owns a 38% stake. He has chosen until this evening to remain a silent partner. As of this moment, that is no longer his preference. The room made a sound. It was not quite a gasp. It was the collective intake of breath that happens when 40 people simultaneously rearrange their understanding of the previous hour. Keanu had not moved. He stood by the table. He looked at Marcus. Mr. Caldwell, he said, in the inside pocket of my jacket, I have a piece of paper. It was given to me by your server, Daniela Hayes, approximately 14 minutes ago. The paper says, do not eat the fish. It is old. The manager did this on purpose. I am not joking. That paper is now evidence. I would also like the room to know that I have, in the pocket of my jeans, an audio recorder that has been running for the past 52 minutes. The recording includes a conversation that occurred in your dry storage room approximately 9 minutes ago between yourself and the sous chef, in which you instructed him to prepare and serve to me a piece of fish that you and he both knew had been held above safe temperature for 4 hours and was no longer fit for human consumption. You also threatened his employment review and the timing of his wife's medical insurance if he refused. I have all of that on audio. The audio is currently streaming live to my counsel in a vehicle parked across the street. Marcus's mouth opened. No sound came out. You have one chance, Mr. Caldwell, Keanu said. He did not raise his voice. You can sit down at this table. You can explain yourself to me and to Ms. Donovan and to our counsel. We will then decide what comes next. Or you can choose any of several other paths, all of which will end by tomorrow morning, with the audio recording being transmitted to the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health, the District Attorney's Office, and the press. Choice is yours. I would like an answer in the next 10 seconds. Marcus Caldwell in that moment became the kind of man he had always been but had never had to look at directly. The kind of man who, when confronted with absolute and unambiguous evidence of his own wrongdoing, did not pause and reflect. The kind of man who reached instead for the one tool he had ever truly trusted. He doubled down. "This is a setup," he said. His voice was high and tight. "This is entrapment. You walked into my restaurant under false pretenses. You dressed as a transient. You provoked a customer service decision based on the dress code. You have orchestrated this entire incident to embarrass me and to manufacture a cause for termination. I will be consulting my attorney immediately, and I expect a full retraction from your counsel by morning." The man in the dark suit with the brown briefcase, who had not spoken yet, opened the briefcase. He removed a single folder. He handed it to Margaret. "Mr. Caldwell," Margaret said. She did not open the folder. "I'd encourage you to consider what I am about to say very carefully before you respond further. The folder I am holding contains a forensic accounting summary completed last week by an independent auditor we retained 4 months ago after irregularities were flagged in this location's inventory reports. The summary identifies approximately $147,000 in falsified invoices, misrouted vendor payments, and inventory shrinkage that traces by name to invoices you personally authorized. It identifies a pattern of behavior going back 28 months. The summary has not yet been forwarded to law enforcement, but it is ready to be. I would suggest that any further claims of entrapment, setup, or retaliation will be received by the relevant authorities with considerable interest and will not be received favorably by yours." Marcus did not move. He did not speak. "You may now sit down," Margaret said. He sat down. He sat down because his legs would not hold him. He sat down because the wall behind which his entire self-image had stood for 38 years had quietly fallen, and he was now standing in the cold air on the other side of it. Sat down, but he did not break. He did not look at the floor. He did not lower his eyes. He looked instead at Keanu, and what was in his eyes was not contrition. It was the older, deeper, more dangerous expression of a man who even now, even here, was reorganizing the events of the night into a story in which he was still the victim. "You don't understand this business," he said. His voice was quieter now, but not chastened. "You buy a restaurant. You bring in consultants. You think you understand. You don't. I have run this location at a 31% margin for 4 years. I have done that because I know who walks through that door, and I know who keeps the lights on. The man who walked in tonight did not belong in this room. I made a decision. It was the wrong decision in retrospect. It was a reasonable decision in the moment. I was protecting your business." Keanu looked at him for a long moment. "Mr. Caldwell," he said quietly, "the man who walked in tonight is the man who owns the building you stand in. The man who walked in tonight is the same man, regardless of his clothes. And every other man you have done this to, in this room over the past 4 years, was also exactly the same person, regardless of his clothes. You did not protect my business. You betrayed the only thing my business was supposed to be." The room was completely silent. "Margaret," Keanu said. "Yes. Have Mr. Caldwell escorted out of the building. He is terminated effective immediately. Coordinate with counsel on the relevant filings. The audio file goes to the health department by close of business tomorrow. The forensic accounting summary goes to the district attorney's office on the same timeline. Mr. Brennan should be retained tonight. We will speak with him separately." Understood. Keanu turned to the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I am very sorry for this disruption to your evening. The kitchen will be closed for the rest of the night. Your meals will be refunded in full. Margaret and our team will be at the host station for the next hour to assist with that and to answer any questions. Again, thank you for your patience." He turned to Daniela. She was standing at the host station where she had stopped when Marcus had called her over. She had not moved during the entire exchange. Her hands were still at her sides. Her face was very still. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, "may I have a moment of your time?" She nodded once, slowly. He crossed the room. He stopped a few feet from her. He did not invade the space. He did not extend a hand. He simply stood there and he looked at her, and he let her see him for a moment without saying anything. "You risked everything," he said quietly. "Yes. Why?" She thought for a moment. She looked at the small framed photograph behind the host station, which was a photograph of the restaurant's founder, who had died 9 years ago, and who was a man Daniela had never met but whose smile she had walked past every shift for 2.5 years. My mother told me, she said, that the cost of not doing the right thing is always higher than the cost of doing it. She died in October. I have spent the last 6 months trying to make sure that wasn't a lie. He nodded slowly. It wasn't a lie. She did not answer. She looked at her hands. She looked back at him. What happens now, Mr. Reeves? I'd like to ask you something. Not right now, tomorrow. I'd like Margaret to meet with you tomorrow, somewhere convenient for you. There's a possibility I'd like to discuss. It involves a position at a new property the group is opening on Western Avenue. The position is general manager. It comes with a salary that is approximately 3.5 times what you make here. Full benefits including comprehensive health insurance and an equity participation in the location's profits. It also comes with the authority to design and enforce the operating philosophy of the location yourself, subject only to my approval, which I do not expect to need to give often. Daniela stared at him. She did not speak for what felt like a long time. Mr. Reeves, Daniela, I'm not asking you to answer now. I'm asking you to think about it overnight. I'm asking you to talk to Margaret tomorrow. I would understand any answer you give. I would understand if the answer is no. I want you to know one thing before you decide. This is not charity. This is not a thank you gift. I am offering you this position because in the last 23 minutes, you have demonstrated to me that you have, in larger quantities than almost anyone I have ever met, the one thing that I cannot teach a general manager, which is the willingness to do the right thing when it costs you. Everything else can be taught, that cannot. She nodded slowly. Her eyes were full. She did not let any of it fall. I'll talk to Margaret tomorrow, she said. Thank you. He stepped back. He turned to Margaret. He nodded. Margaret moved toward the host station and began the work of coordinating the dispersal of the room. Two private security officers, who had been waiting in a car a block over, had arrived during the last minute of Keanu's conversation, and they were now standing on either side of Marcus Caldwell, who was being escorted, not gently, toward the front door. As Marcus passed Daniela, he stopped. He turned his head. He looked at her. What was in his eyes was not what should have been there. There was no remorse. There was no shame. There was only the cold, narrow, focused fury of a man who had decided in the previous 90 seconds that everything that had just happened to him had been her fault. You will regret this, he said quietly. I will make sure of it. Daniela looked at him. She did not flinch. She did not step back. She simply looked at him until the silence became uncomfortable, and then she said, very calmly, Marcus, the only thing I regret is that I waited 2.5 years to do it. The security officers moved him along. He went out the door. He did not look back. And he did not, in any moment after that night, in any of the moments that followed in the long collapse of his career and his reputation and his finances and his standing in the small clannish world of fine dining management in Los Angeles, ever once admit that he had done anything wrong. He told the police he was being scapegoated. He told the journalists he was being silenced. He told his lawyer the audio recording had been manipulated. He told his ex-wife it was a coordinated attack by people who did not understand the business. He told himself. In the small apartment in Van Nuys he eventually had to rent after the legal fees, and the civil settlements had drained the rest of his savings, that the world had simply not been ready for the kind of leader he had been. He never said the word sorry. He never thought it. He did not have the equipment. That was the price, eventually, of the kind of certainty he had built his life on. And it was a price he paid, slowly and silently for a very long time. The fallout came in stages. Within 72 hours of the night at the Aurelia, the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health had opened a formal investigation. The audio recording, transcribed and notarized, forwarded to the district attorney's office on Wednesday morning. By Thursday afternoon, a story had appeared in the Los Angeles Times under the byline of a reporter named Sandra Pellegrini, who had been covering the restaurant industry in Southern California for 19 years and who had received the tip from someone, somewhere, that she would not later identify. Story did not mention Keanu Reeves. It mentioned Marcus Caldwell by name. It mentioned the Aurelia by name. It quoted from the audio recording 3 sentences that Marcus had spoken to Tyler Brennan in a dry storage room. It's fish, Tyler. It got cold and then it got warm. It's not radioactive. Those 3 sentences became, in the next 48 hours, the most quoted sentences in the Los Angeles food media. They were repeated on talk radio. They appeared in a viral thread on social media that was screenshotted 411,000 times. They were referenced in a column by a national food writer in the New York Times the following Sunday, in a piece about the systemic failures of luxe hospitality. Marcus Caldwell did not give an interview to any of the journalists who contacted him. His attorney advised against it. His attorney advised against many things. His attorney also advised him on the second Tuesday after the incident that the criminal charges being prepared by the district attorney's office would likely include reckless endangerment, attempted assault by means of poison, and a separate set of charges related to the embezzlement that the forensic accounting summary had documented. His attorney explained that a plea deal was the most rational path forward and would likely result in a suspended sentence with restitution and a permanent ban from working in the restaurant industry in California. Marcus refused. He told his attorney that he intended to fight every charge. She told his attorney that the restaurant industry needed him more than he needed it. He told his attorney that he was the victim of a coordinated campaign by a wealthy investor who had used a young, impressionable server as a pawn. His attorney, a careful man named Robert Aldecoa, who had practiced criminal defense in Los Angeles for 28 years, listened to all of this. Then he resigned from the representation. Marcus's next attorney was not as careful and was also not as good. Trial, when it eventually came 11 months later, lasted 4 days. The audio recording was admitted into evidence. Tyler Brennan testified under a grant of cooperation. Daniela Hayes testified for 41 minutes, and she did not look at Marcus a single time. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. The verdict was guilty on all counts. The sentence was 18 months in a low-security correctional facility, 3 years of probation, and a permanent restraining order from any food service licensure in the state of California. Marcus served 14 months. He emerged into a world that had, in the meantime, forgotten him almost entirely, which was, in a way that he would never have admitted out loud, the most painful part of the entire experience. The story did not end that night. It rarely does. Tyler Brennan walked out of the kitchen at the end of the night and sat down at table 17 across from Keanu Reeves and told him everything. He did not ask for protection. He did not ask for leniency. He simply explained, in the steady voice of a man who had decided that the rest of his life was going to depend on whether he could tell the truth out loud, that Marcus had threatened his evaluation, that his wife was on bed rest with preeclampsia, that his health insurance ended in 30 days from any non-renewal, that he had folded under the pressure, that he had plated the fish. Keanu listened. When Tyler was finished, Keanu said, "Tyler, you're not the villain in this story. You're not the hero either. You're the person who folded. Most people fold. The world doesn't work the way it does because there are a lot of Marcuses. It works the way it does because there are a lot of folders. I'm not going to fire you. I'm going to give you a chance to be the person who doesn't fold next time. Because there will be a next time. There always is. Your wife is going to have her baby. Your insurance is going to be uninterrupted. You're going to keep your job. And the next time someone in this kitchen tells you to do something you know is wrong, you are going to remember this night. And you are going to remember that I gave you back what your fear had taken from you. And you are going to give it to someone else." Tyler did not speak for a long time. "Yes, sir," he said finally. "That's the only thing I'll ever ask of you." Tyler walked out of the Aurelia that night and did not stop walking until he reached his car in the staff lot 2 blocks away. He sat in the driver's seat for 14 minutes before he started the engine. He called Caroline from the parking lot. He did not tell her what had happened. He told her he loved her. He told her he was coming home. He drove the 40 minutes to Glendale in silence. She walked into the apartment. Caroline was on the couch with heating pad against her back. She looked up at him. She knew the way wives know that something had happened. She did not ask. She waited. He sat down on the edge of the couch, and he told her everything. The dry storage room, the threat, the fish, the note on the table, the audio recording, the 2 men in dark blazers. The way Daniela Hayes had walked across a dining room with a folded piece of paper in her hand and had become, in that walk, the bravest person he had ever known. He told her the part he had not said in front of Keanu. He told her how close he had come to plating the fish without saying anything at all, How he had stood in the dry storage room with the door propped open 3 inches, and he had not thought, even once, about the man at table 17. She had thought only about himself. He had thought only about the insurance. He had been ready in that moment to feed poison to a stranger because it was the easiest way to keep what he had. The shame of it sat in his throat like a stone. Caroline did not say anything for a long time. Then she said, "Tyler, you didn't do it. That counts. The part where you almost did is the part you have to live with. The part where you didn't is the part you build the rest of your life on." He did not sleep that night. He did not sleep most of the following night either. But by the third night, he slept. And in the months that followed, in the steady work of cooking food for a home that had been built on a different philosophy than the one he had grown up in, the stone in his throat slowly became something else. Not absolution, not erasure. Something more like a small dark seed that had been planted in his chest and that he tended, the way a person tends anything they intend to keep alive. Daniela met with Margaret Donovan at a coffee shop in Koreatown the next morning. They talked for 2 hours. Daniela asked questions about hours, about training budgets, about hiring authority, about the precise meaning of operating philosophy, and the limits of her discretion. She did not say yes right away. She wanted to know the shape of the responsibility before she agreed to carry it. She signed the agreement on Friday afternoon. Salary was, in fact, 3.5 times what she had made at the Aurelia. The benefits were better than the benefits she had ever imagined existing. The equity participation was, by her calculation, going to allow her to pay off the last of her mother's hospice bill by the end of the calendar year. She did not tell Sad right away. She waited a week. When she did tell her, the two of them sat at the kitchen table in the apartment on Mansfield Avenue and looked at the bills clipped together with the binder clip, and Sad looked up at her sister with eyes full of something that was somewhere between disbelief and the very specific kind of pride that one survivor feels for another. And she said, "Mom would have known you'd do it. She told me I'd have to," Daniela said. She was right. In the weeks that followed, Daniela moved through a strange and quiet transition. She did not quit her bus pass. She did not buy new clothes. She walked into the Western Avenue property each morning, walked through the construction dust and the partially installed kitchen equipment, and the rolls of butcher paper covering the floor. She sat down with the contractors and the architects and the designers, and she asked her questions in the same careful voice she had used. To ask if a customer wanted sparkling or still, she did not pretend to know things she did not know. She asked, she learned. She wrote everything down in a small black notebook she kept in her back pocket. By the end of the second week, the lead architect, a woman in her 40s named Renata Vargas, had stopped talking to her like a new client and had started talking to her like a colleague. Margaret Donovan checked in twice a week. She did not micromanage. She brought coffee. She asked what Daniela needed. She got it. Once in the third week, Daniela asked her quietly, in the empty back office, why Mr. Reeves had hired her. Why a stranger? Why a server with no management experience? Margaret looked at her for a long moment. "Daniela," she said, "Mr. Reeves has hired exactly 4 general managers in 20 years. 3 of them came to him the way you did. He doesn't trust resumes. He trusts what people do when they think no one is watching. You showed him that. The rest of this you can learn. He has people to teach you. He hired you for the part nobody can teach." Daniela wrote that down too. The new restaurant opened 4 months later on Western Avenue, a few blocks south of Wilshire, in a building that had once been a Greek family restaurant, and before that, an architect's office, and before that, a barber shop owned by a man named Lou, whose photograph still hung in the back hallway because Daniela had asked the contractors to leave it. The restaurant was called Common Ground. It served good food at prices that were honest. It had a community menu, listed without ceremony at the bottom of the regular menu, available to anyone who needed it, no questions asked, no judgments rendered, no special table required. Staff was trained on their first day in a single operating principle. Daniela said it to every new hire herself, sitting across from in a small back office. Everyone who walks through that door is the same person. Their clothes don't tell you who they are. Their car doesn't tell you who they are. Their car doesn't tell you who they are. Treat them the way you would want your mother to be treated on the worst day of her life. That is the only rule. If you can't do it, this is not the job for you and we'll part friends. If you can, you'll be part of something that matters. In a small wooden frame mounted on the wall near the host station, behind glass, hung a piece of paper. The paper was worn at the folds. The handwriting was steady. It read, "Do not eat the fish, it is old. The manager did this on purpose. I am not joking." Below the frame, a small plaque was inscribed with a single line. "One small act of courage is what every other act of courage is made of." Daniela read it every morning when she unlocked the front door. Some mornings she stood there for a minute and let herself remember her mother. Some mornings she stood there and thought of Tyler Brennan, who was now the executive chef at Common Ground, and whose wife Caroline had delivered a healthy boy in May. Some mornings she just read the line, opened the door, and got to work. 6 months after the night at the Aurelia, Hank Marlowe, a reporter for a small online publication that covered the restaurant industry in Los Angeles, published a long feature about Common Ground. Spent 2 paragraphs on the restaurant's philosophy, 3 paragraphs on the food, and the rest of the piece on the woman who ran it. He did not mention Keanu Reeves by name. Daniela had asked him not to. Keanu had asked him not to. Story Hank told was the story of a former server who had risked her job to do the right thing, and a restaurant that had been built around that single decision, and the line that hung on the wall near the host station that every employee read on their first day and learned, slowly over months and years, to live up to. The article got 18,000 views in the first week. Most stories about restaurants do not. It got 2,000 more in the second week. It is still online. You can read it. Keanu Reeves rode his motorcycle up through Topanga Canyon late one evening in September, 6 months after the night at the Aurelia, on a road he had been riding for 30 years. The light was the color of the inside of a seashell. The air smelled of dry sage and eucalyptus. He stopped at a small turnout halfway up, the way he often did, and he sat on the bike for a while and looked out at the canyon. He thought about Hollis Pratt. He thought about a sandwich that had been wrapped in butcher paper in his refrigerator on a Thursday night 40 years earlier, and which had still been there on the Friday morning, uneaten, because his friend had not been on the bench when he had finally remembered to bring it. He thought about Daniela Hayes. He thought about Tyler Brennan. He thought about a piece of paper folded into a young woman's palm in a dining room in Beverly Hills. He thought about how much courage costs and how little courage is required, and how the two of those things are exactly the same thing, said from 2 different sides of the room. Started the bike. He rode home in the dark. There was nothing in the house waiting for him. There was no one to tell about the evening. There was only the canyon and the sound of the engine and the small private satisfaction of a man who had finally, after 40 years, delivered the sandwich. The world is full of people who fold. The world is also full of people who do not. The difference between them is rarely a difference of strength. It is almost always, in the end, a difference of memory, a difference of who you remember when the moment comes and what they asked of you before they left. Daniela Hayes remembered her mother, and because she did on a Tuesday night in March in a dining room in Beverly Hills, the question on the door of an empire that not bore another man's name was finally answered. His name is on the door, and it is hers too, and it is yours if you want it. Thank you for following this story. Let us know in the comments below. If this story has moved you and you'd like to stand with us in bringing more voices of truth and hope to light, please consider supporting our work. Even the smallest gift helps us continue creating and sharing these powerful stories. You can find the donate link in the description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter we're preparing for you. So while this story is fictional, the lessons about human dignity and respect are very real.